Hello. I'm Josh. I'm the engineering manager at Squanch Games currently, but I've been at a lot of different studios over the years, and you know what, let me just get right into the talk and I can kind of explain where I'm going with this. So, this is a talk all about working as a remote developer. First off, disclaimer, this is all my own opinion, doesn't reflect any of the companies I've worked for, but also all opinions are opinions, so keep that in mind. Moving on. There's also going to be a lot of memes, so just go with it. They cut off about halfway through when it gets a little bit text heavy. So, I've been in the industry for about 8 years. I've worked at 3 different studios. The only reason this is important is because if you look at the timeline there, about halfway through working at Nexon is when COVID hit, and they sent us all home for about 2 weeks. They're like, it's going to be 2 weeks at home, and then you're going to come right back. And we never did. So, the important thing here is that I've worked about half of my time in the industry in a studio and half of it remotely. So it gives me a pretty good way of comparing the two. That's really all that matters about me. You don't need a lot else. So, first off, I really like working remotely. So here's some of the benefits. Like, you get to spend more time at home. I actually get to see my wife and my cats and my bunny. It's pretty nice. And the hours are pretty flexible. Like, technically you're still supposed to be there the same amount of time as you would in a studio, but people are a little more chill about the whole thing. So if you're like, you know what, I have a doctor's appointment for a couple hours, do you mind if I just leave and I'll make up the time later tonight? They're usually pretty okay with that. So it makes things a little bit easier when you have emergencies come up like that. It also avoids the pretty dreaded relocation issue that's been coming up a lot in the industry lately, because you don't want to move to another state or country and then get laid off and find out that you're stuck here or that you have to go back, especially when you've spent all your money to get there. You also don't need a commute, so it saves you some money, saves you some time, all great stuff. And this one is sort of a benefit and a drawback. It means that you're available if something goes wrong at work. So if you broke something and you're the only one who can fix it, you could always hop on and fix it. There's some bad things about that, but we'll get to that later. So, mainly what this talk is going to be about, though, is issues that come up with working remotely and how to resolve those, or at least ways that we've tried to resolve them. Can't say that everything's been done completely, but, you know, we do our best. So, I broke it down into 4 main issues that seem to be coming up a lot. You can read them right there, but it's basically the communication can suffer a little bit. Team building and isolation. There's this kind of feeling like you aren't really part of the studio sometimes. Career and skill growth can also tend to subside a little bit. And one that I probably have the most trouble with is separating work and home. So we're going to do each of these one at a time. Start with communication. This is where all the memes drop off. I apologize. It's going to get kind of boring on the slides. So, first off, being in an office does make it easier to communicate with people. That's just how it is. Like, if I need to talk to somebody, I can walk over to their desk and just ask them a question. Or I can look over their shoulder for what it is they're working on. If there's any issues that come up in the development, you can actually hash them out in person, so you can grab that person, go into a room, work together on like a whiteboard, and just kind of figure out what you need to do to solve the problem. That kind of same point I just made right there. And in a remote setting, people not only have a harder time communicating, they're just less likely to do it because the person isn't right there, so they feel like they're putting someone out by messaging them on Slack or whatever service you use. So, some ways to kind of resolve that. The first one that I try and really stress for people is to use voice chat as often as possible. Because when you're typing everything out, there's this tendency for everything to get kind of lost in translation. And you're working with people who have a completely different skill set than you do. Like, I'm a programmer. If I'm working with an artist and they're trying to describe things to me about like the IK of the animation or, you know, the blending or any of that stuff, it's not something I'm super familiar with. So I might be misunderstanding what they're telling me. And if I can get them into a room, anytime something doesn't quite make sense, I'm like, explain it to me differently. Like, treat me like I'm 5, something like that. But it just makes it easier to have that back and forth. Another thing that we do is at Squanch, we have Discord rooms where you can just kind of hang out as you're working. So everyone will kind of hop into that and they'll work in tandem. And that's helpful because it kind of creates a studio environment in a way. So if you have a question, rather than just walking over to someone's desk, you can just kind of shout it out in the room. So it's just working on something that says, hey, do you have any idea how to change this thing? And yeah, they usually do. So it just simplifies that whole situation. You don't have to keep reaching out to people for things. Another thing that's very important is to keep the discussions that you're having in public channels. So one thing we struggled with at Squanch early on was people kept DMing each other to get questions answered. And it made a lot of sense, you know? You wanted to get the answers from the person who had the answers. The problem with that is down the line, there'd be these moments where somebody would say, how come we never talked about this? And it's like, oh, we did in this other message you weren't part of. And that doesn't really work for anyone. So the secret to that is just when you're having a discussion like this, rather than DMing someone, you just start a thread in whatever messaging service you use. I'm just going to keep referring to Slack because that's what I use. But you start a thread in there and you want to tag in all of the people who might be involved in this conversation. So if you're working on a particular feature, you tag in always production. Production is the biggest one because they're the ones who are kind of keeping everything on schedule and making sure that everything is tracked. You almost always want to tag in QA as well because they're the ones who need to know about changes that are taking place in the game. And then you want to tag in anybody who is related to that feature. So any programmers, animators, sound people, just designers. I'm not going to list every single department in the studio, but you get the idea. Because everybody needs to know what's going on, and that way down the line if somebody says, we never talked about that, you can refer back to that thread and go, here it all is, here's all the information, read through, catch yourself up. All right, so team building and isolation, I'll just move on to that one. There's kind of this general feeling of not being part of the group when you're working remotely because you don't get to see anybody. You don't go into the office, there's not that same kind of like camaraderie you would get normally. So a lot of times you feel like you don't know the people you work with. You can't put a face to the name, and if you don't work with them on a regular basis, they're just another name on Slack. So, and especially with people who are newly hired to the company, if they haven't been given any sort of introduction to those people, they won't actually know who anyone is. So, how do we solve that? The first one that I really like is I always keep my camera on whenever I'm in any sort of meeting. A lot of people don't like to do that. I think it's really important because if you do that, people know who you are. And this isn't something I've ever encountered. It's more of a personal paranoia, but I'm always worried that if people don't know who I am, I'm easier to fire. Or lay off, rather. But it's one of those things where it's like, if everybody sees your face on a regular basis, they're like, oh, we don't want to fire this person. They're awesome. Because they actually know who you are. So I just think it helps, but it also makes everybody feel like they know each other more because they see each other on a regular basis. If you always have your camera off, they don't really get used to seeing you. It's not a perfect solution, but it helps. Also, like I said before, having a voice chat room where everybody can hop in, very helpful because then you can just go back and forth and talk to each other. It'll help with working, but it'll also give you an opportunity just to catch up. So a lot of times those discussions get very off topic, just asking about, what'd you do over the weekend? Or have you tried out, I don't know, Doom the Dark Ages? Like that's been the general conversation at work lately. So these are the kind of things that you would get in a studio. And if you aren't given the opportunity to do it remotely, it can make things harder. Need some water. All right. Similar to that, you also want to have channels where people can chat about hobbies, interests, things like that. We have that on Slack. We have a bunch of like random channels that are non-work channels that have a particular tag on them. And it's just a good place to kind of get to know people who share your interests. Once again, makes you feel like you're part of the group. And then some other ways you can kind of encourage that team building. Online team hangouts work great. some of the things we've done at Squanch, we will have movie nights where we put on like usually some kind of terrible movie and do sort of a mystery science theater sort of thing where everybody just hops into Discord and makes fun of it as they watch. You can also do like team games. We've done that. Like we'll get some of the departments together and just have them play Fall Guys for an hour. The important thing about that though is you want to do it during work hours, because there's this, if you do a team building exercise after work, it has this really awkward vibe to it where it's like, well, if you're not willing to give up some of your free time for work, then you're not really part of the group. And that's just not cool. So, and then meeting in person is always great if you can arrange that. So finding out if people kind of live near each other and that if they can do local meetups is very helpful. And if it's feasible, if the studio can bring everybody to one central location just to hang out for a few days, that's amazing. Obviously, that's a financial thing, but if it can be worked out, it definitely helps to get a chance to see everybody, even just occasionally, you know, like once a year, every 2 years, something. All right, but let's move on to the next issue. So career and skill growth. You don't really get as many opportunities when you're working remotely to learn on the job in the same way. It's getting back to the same stuff I mentioned with communication. You can't really go over to someone's desk and see what they're working on. And similarly, they can't come over to your desk and help you with something. So because of that, once again, going into some sort of like video chat and being able to share your screen with someone is a good way to kind of work through that. But it's really just something that's kind of hard to fix, you know? And I hadn't really gotten to this part, but there's a tendency for people to keep giving you the same tasks, because if you're not branching out to different stuff and people don't know you that well, they're just gonna go, well, this is what you did really well on last time. We need that done again. Why don't we give that to the same person? So moving on to ways to fix that. We like to call them juicing sessions at work. There might be different terms for it at different places, but basically it's just collaborative work and voice chat. We already talked about this a little bit, but that really helps because if you can just kind of talk out loud about the work you're doing, then other people who either have different knowledge sets or are more senior than you can chime in and go, actually, you know, there's a really easy way to do what you're trying to do. Let me explain this real quick. And that will help build up that knowledge set. Educational talks can also be really useful. We do those at Squanch, where if somebody has expertise in a particular area, they'll put together a talk like this, and we'll just schedule maybe an hour, invite everybody in the company who's interested to join, and they'll explain how a particular feature or concept works, and it just kind of helps everybody learn more about that. Like, I'm trying to think what the last one we did. My boss did one on multi-threading. So, you know, it's just a handy way to kind of build that skill set up. And then getting back to what I was saying before about you getting the same sort of tasks over and over, it helps to kind of diversify what each developer is working on. So even though it can sometimes slow down development slightly, if you can move tasks to people who aren't usually working on those types of tasks, it'll help build up a variety of skills in different areas, and then you don't end up in situations where you've got the one person who can do something, because if that person gets injured, has to be out for any significant period of time, or decides they want to go to a different company, you're kind of screwed. So you need to make sure you've prepared for that. And once again, another thing that is kind of, it works if you have the finances for it, but that's not always the case, is if you can get the company to pay for classes, tutorials, things like that. We've done that before, and it helps out. Okay, and last thing, and for me, I think this is probably the biggest one, is separating your work life and your home life. Because when you're working remotely, you are always in the office, and there's no helping that because it's right there. So, because of that, it's easy to fall into this pattern where you just always feel like you need to be at work. Yeah, I don't know if that's the case for everyone. For me, it definitely was, because I feel very invested in the project I'm working on, and I want it to turn out as good as it can. So if something's going wrong, I want to fix it. I just can't help it. And the thing that makes it even harder is when you're working remotely, you can hire from anywhere. So chances are you have coworkers who are not in your time zone, and they're going to message you when it's not your work hours. So that was one thing that would always mess with me. I'd be, sitting on the couch, relaxing. Somebody would be like, "This is broken, what do I do?" And I'd just be like, well, I could go just help them real quick, and then I'm working again. So, how do you fix that? This is all difficult to do, but you have to find a way to be very adamant about it. First off, you need to maintain constant and defined hours. So there can be exceptions to that, and especially when you're getting near the end of a project or a deadline, there's going to be those occasional moments of we need to work on the weekend to get this in or something like that. But you need to make sure that it doesn't become a common occurrence. It has to be, this is an exception to that rule. Because if it's something you allow to happen all the time, people get used to you being available at all times. And if there is a situation where you need to work outside of your normal work hours, I highly recommend communicating that to your family, whoever they may be, because if they aren't aware of when you're on or off work, it might always feel like you are at work. So it helps to be able to say, I have to work late tonight, but I will be off at 8 o'clock or something like that, because then they still have a hard time for when you're disconnected from work, and it's like, I just get you as a person now and not you as a worker. If you have a way of indicating that you're in or out of office, you should definitely use it, because that'll kind of cut down on the number of people who are sending you messages in your off hours. On Slack, we have the option to set different statuses, and we have one that is out of office. So when you leave, you just set that, and then you might still get messages, but it's less likely, because if somebody goes to message you, they'll see that little icon sitting there by your name, and they might go, you know what, I can message you tomorrow, or schedule a message or something like that. You also want to disconnect from work when you're offline. So if someone does message you, don't message them back, because if you do, now you're working. And it does give them that expectation that they can reach you at any time. Sometimes I have to break that one because I'm managing. So if someone's like messaging me to get a meal comped for working overtime, I do have to respond to that. Beyond that though, I ignore messages that are out of work hours, and you just respond in the morning. There's very rarely a time where someone needs an immediate response and it can't wait till the next day. And this is a hard one for me personally, but I'm working on it. You need to release the pressure of work when you're offline, because something I had a tendency of doing was when I was working with people, I'd be very frustrated and tired, but I'd try not to show it because I'm at work and I want to put on a good work persona, so I'm very polite to people and friendly, and then I'd get off work and I would feel miserable, and I would be kind of a miserable person to be around the rest of the night. It doesn't work very well. And so even if you are disconnected from work at a reasonable hour, if you aren't yourself when you get off of work, what's the point? So what I recommend doing is finding a way to sort of decompress when you're off of work. I don't know what that is. It's going to be different for everybody, but basically find a way to just kind of detach from everything. The problems that you're trying to solve will still be there tomorrow. You'll find a solution when you're more well rested. So just try not to let it get to you. I know that's hard, but that's really the best you can do. That's all I've got. Thanks for listening.